Welcome to Paranormal Heart Podcast. We are a pre-recorded show streaming on UPRN 107.7 FM in New Orleans. I'm your host, Kat Ward. Thank you so much for tuning in. Before I get to my special guest, I just want to mention that if you want to help support the show, please hit that like button, share, and subscribe. You can also find Paranormal Heart Podcast merch on TeePublic. The link will be in the show notes. My special guest tonight needs no introductions. I'm so happy to have Michelle Desrochers, who will be discussing Halloween folklore. Welcome, Michelle.
Hello, how are
Hello,
you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being on. This is amazing.
Well, well, we always have so much fun. I love coming on with you.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah, I love talking to you.
thank you. Thank you. Of course, it's spooky month, so it makes it that much more
Exactly.
fun.
Yep. And what a great topic for Spooky Month.
I think so. I think a lot of people don't realize that Halloween isn't celebrated all over the world, and it has a lot of deep-rooted traditions. So what I can do, of course, is go over some of the ancient origins and get into how different places celebrate and what certain things like black cats and pumpkins and what they actually how they all fit in.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're ready, I'll get started because there
I
is
am
quite a bit.
ready. There is,
Oh,
yes.
okay. So it's one of my favorite topics, of
Mine
course.
too.
And when I researched it, I found there's been so many celebrations, which really did include the modern like Day of the Dead celebrations. Because sometimes they're so close together, being November 1st to the 2nd, that they merge them together.
Mm-hmm.
But the birthplace of modern day Halloween is said to be Ireland, of course, right? Everything happens out in Ireland. I know.
Yeah.
And it all began with Samhain, which is, the Celts who lived roughly 2,000 years ago in Ireland, Scotland, England, northern France. And they celebrated this on the New Year, which was November 1st. That was their New Year. So not even October 31st. So that kind of keeps it really interesting. But they believe that on the eve of the New Year, the boundary between the worlds of the living and the dead became blurred. So the veil was its thinnest at that point. So on October 31st, they celebrated Samhain, and they believed that the spirits of the dead would return to Earth. So the Celts believed in the presence of otherworldly spirits, and they made it easier in the presence of otherworldly spirits. So they believed in that presence, and they made it easier for the druids or the priests to make predictions of the future because they would be in communication. And during this time, the druids would build huge sacred fires, and people would gather around to burn crops and animals for sacrifices, and their Celtic deities. They wore costumes. Imagine 2,000 years ago, they wore costumes, and a lot of it consisted of animal heads and skins, of course, for the time. And they would attempt to tell each other's fortunes. So upon finishing the celebration, they relate their health fires, to which they extinguished earlier. And from those flames, they would come into their homes because it was a sacred bonfire, and they believed it would protect them through the coming winter months. So by lighting these fires, they could honor the dead and moved along on their way. And they would usually take it into their home and light the hearth just so they could have that extra protection. But they believe that there were all types of beings present during this time: ghosts, fairies, demons, things of that nature. Now, that was just the basic origins of Halloween. And
I had forgotten about the fires, bringing them into the homes to light the hearth. I totally forgot about that. And I just want to mention one quick thing. Those of you who aren't familiar with Samhain, if you look at it, it looks like it's pronounced Samhain, but the actual Celtic pronunciation is Samhain.
Correct. An old one.
Old, yeah.
Yep. And of course, enter the Romans, who basically always, they would amalgamate as they came into other territories. And the Celts are really big or the Romans are really big in England. I mean, there are settlements literally everywhere. In fact, I have a friend who's an archaeologist there, and his home, among those in his community, are built on old Roman burials. And 30 feet from his house is an old Roman road. and he's up in England, of course. So it's just incredible. But around 43 AD, the Romans conquered the majority of Celtic territory, and for about 400 years, they ruled the Celt lands, and they had two festivals, which were, Roman origin combined with traditional Samhain. They had Feralia, which is something that usually occurred the late October when the
Mhm.
Romans commemorated the passing of the dead, and Pomona, which is a festival created in honor of the goddess of fruits and the trees. So I think we're getting in again to this whole harvest thing.
Mhm.
But it though what symbolized Pomona was the apple, and I think this is where they would bring in the ancient Samhain tradition of bobbing for apples,
Ah, you
right?
just taught me something. I didn't know all that.
Ah, believe
Yeah.
me, I, it was a journey trying to explore a lot of this information because there is so much. Then you're
There
getting into
is.
All Saints Days, All
Mhm.
Souls Day, right? And Pope Boniface the 16th basically sort of brought in around 609 AD, um, you know, honoring Christian martyrs and saints. So we're getting into All Saints Day. Pope Gregory III expanded on this, but they did it from like May 13th to November 1st. So some of these people celebrate for months. I could only wish that we could celebrate Halloween 4 months instead of like literally
Yes, yes.
days, because it's just such a fun time. But they incorporated some of that. And then we had All Souls Days, which celebrated with a lot of similarities to Samhain, with bonfires and parades, dressing up in costumes as saints, angels, and devils. And it was also called All Hallows. So it just technically means All Saints Day. And the night before, these traditional rite of Samhain in the Celtic religion, it soon began being called All Hallows Eve and eventually led to Halloween.
It's so
So
fascinating how it has evolved.
it has through ancient traditions.
Mhm,
I mean, I tend to wonder what our ancestors or what these people that went back 2,000 years ago
mhm.
would think of the festivities and some of their traditions being so widely, um, I guess, mimicked, or how we've incorporated it
Yep.
into our own cultures. But out of that came so many early traditions.
Mhm.
Like it was just some of the stuff that we still celebrate today, which is really fascinating. Um, if you can believe it, it used to take place in the summer.
Oh,
It
I
used to
didn't
be
know
called
that.
May Day.
Oh,
Mhm.
Mayday. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
May Day, right?
Yeah.
So it was in the summer and it was called May Day until the church moved it. So
Oh.
again, it was believed that the veil between the worlds was very fragile and that the dead could easily come back and forth into the land of the living. And people
Hmm.
needed to be very careful because Halloween night was said to be the night, of course, of the fairy funeral.
Yes.
The fairy funeral. I thought, wow, that's
Hmm.
interesting. And the common belief was that all souls of those who died in that past year would be taken to the gates of hell by the fairies. The fairies could not enter as they had no souls. And they were usually in a bad mood, apparently, around this time of year. So they would often meet you on the road and they would take you with them.
Hmm.
How you would avoid this back in the day was taking off your coat, turning it inside out, and saying the following: my face to you, my back to you.
Hmm.
Right? Crazy tradition right there that
I know.
I
I've
all
heard
of
bits and pieces of all of this, but yeah, so much of it I didn't know.
mhm,
This is
mhm.
fascinating.
It is. It's super
Yeah.
fascinating because it's like, who brought that up? Who found that out is what I'd like
Yeah.
to know,
Yeah.
because you have stories, but stories are usually based on somebody in that village had to experience being grabbed by a
Yeah.
fairy
Yeah.
and being able to do this little ritual and walk away unscathed, like right?
Yeah.
Like most things. So at Halloween, you also had to give a warning when throwing water out at night from your home, because back then they used to throw it out their windows,
Yep.
right? Just in case spirit was passing by and you had to say, away, away, dirty water. And
Huh.
you had to warn them by using this technique. So
Mhm.
not only did the souls of the dead become active at Halloween, but so were otherworldly beings such as fairies, she-hulks, which was said to be somewhere between a fairy and the soul of the dead.
I've never
And
actually heard of that one.
no, that was one that I had never heard of at the time either. Like I researched this quite a long time ago because
Yeah.
I've always done so many shows, and after a while, you just have to keep it interesting. But I always had a healthy curiosity about it
Mhm.
because even modern day, not everybody celebrates Halloween. It's very
Yep.
popular here in the West,
Mhm.
but you only have certain countries who will celebrate it, any other
Mhm.
time. And then they had what were called pukas, which were half ghost and half fairy. So, half fairies beings could do all types of things, such as enter into people's houses and create a lot of havoc to the living, which we know fairies
Mhm.
can be very aggressive little things. But,
That's a way of
right?
putting it.
Yeah, yeah, we'll leave that one right there.
Yeah.
So, you know, but people believe that they could ward off otherworldly beings with a fire. However,
Yeah.
most tended to stay indoors and tell stories. So there was a huge belief that their dead ancestors were the best ones to look out for them and protect them, and they had interest in helping the family lines continue. So sometimes they would set, extra seat for them
Yeah.
to sit at or an extra place at the table,
Mhm.
things of that nature. So then we're getting into some of the Day of the Dead traditions when you look at that aspect of everything,
Mhm.
right? So enter the dead. So it was understood that on Halloween, the dead would come back and administer warnings, conduct unfinished business, and bestow gifts and other advice. So I guess depends on what kind of mood they're in when they're coming in. But
Yeah.
some of these gifts would include cures,
Mhm.
second sight, which basically is your ability, of course, mediumship,
Mhm.
um, great riches by showing people where the money was hidden,
Ha. That
right?
would be handy.
Where's the money?
Yeah.
Where's the will? I
Yeah.
know, right?
Or the
Um,
deeds.
that's right. But a mother who died in childbirth, for example, would come back to suckle her child, and this would give the child great power. But if you misbehaved, a ghost might warn you of the consequences, and they could in turn punish you.
That doesn't sound fun.
It doesn't sound fun. I'm starting to have
No.
a Krampus Christmas moment.
I know, right?
I know. I'm just like, hmm. So even at Halloween, you can't escape it. You
Yeah.
can't even stand a chance,
You
but
just have to be good.
I know. But a lot of traditions that we do celebrate today stem back from ancient times. It's become so commercialized that I don't think people really understand
Mhm.
how far back it goes. Like we look at a pumpkin, the jack-o'-lantern.
Oh,
It's
I
that you
love the
think
pumpkin.
Halloween, you think pumpkins. Fall harvest, pumpkins. Everything is pumpkins. But it goes back to an 18th
Mhm.
century Irish folklore about the wandering blacksmith. So the legend says, I'll see if I can bring this up. Don't want to miss a beat because it's got a lot of info. Legend says there was a blacksmith named Stingy Jack. There's a handle. So he was a bit of a drinker, a player, and a very lazy man who spent his days laying under an oak tree. Satan came to visit one occasion, wanting to take Jack to hell. Jack challenged him to climb the oak tree, and when the devil was at the top, Jack stuck the cross to the trunk, and that was it. Prevent him from coming back down.
Hmm.
So essentially, axed it. The devil
Yeah.
was so angry. So Jack struck a deal with him, saying that he would let him come down as long as he never invited him to hell again, and the devil agreed. When Jack died, he couldn't enter heaven due to all of his singing and couldn't enter hell for having to see the devil. To compensate for this, the devil gave Jack a charcoal to light his way on icy nights, where he would have to roam until the day of judgment. The charcoal was placed inside a hollowed bucket, essentially a turnip, because back then they carved out turnips, not pumpkins.
Can you imagine carving a turnip? How hard that would be?
Oh, yeah.
I can't imagine.
No, I can't imagine it either. And I
No.
think there's still like maybe some of our European immigrants who have come to the country who will still maybe do it with turnips, which is a heck of a job. I
Mm-hmm.
think the pumpkins are a Western thing.
Yep.
So anyway, he had to put this lump of coal or charcoal inside of a turnip, and they called them jack lanterns, right? Stingy jack lantern. So that's where that came from.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so essentially they would burn forever like a lantern, and the Irish call them jack lanterns. They believed that putting a lantern in their window, that it would keep a wanderer away, being Jack. And over time, people started carving faces in their gourds to ward off evil spirit. But when the Irish immigrated to America, rather, they found that pumpkins were just more abundant than turnips, and they made the switch.
And a little easier to carve.
And a little easier to carve, because I mean, they came in early days. I don't really know. Wouldn't have been too much intricate, carving tools like now we have pumpkin carving tools and knives, and definitely would have been a lot easier now than back then.
But if you think back then, their tools that they had might have been a lot sharper than what we have now, too. So
That's
maybe it
true.
was a little easier.
Real steel.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes, I do agree with that.
Yeah.
So then we're getting to black cats.
Love black
Poor
cats
black
so
cats.
much.
It's pretty bad when now in modern days, because of the superstition that has been created around them, you have all of these rescues saying, please do not come in, and they won't adopt their black cats out in and around October at all, or the fall. They will wait till after Halloween to even consider adopting them out, which is very sad. But the folklore black cats basically goes back to the Dark Ages, with when the witch hunts were commonplace. Many introverted elderly women were used to being witches and could turn into black cats to hide from people. This is the lore, of course, right? So another medieval myth is that Satan will turn himself into a black cat when socializing with witches. So it's considered bad luck if a black cat crosses your path. However, in Ireland, Scotland, and England, it's considered good luck, which is what I have always said.
Me too. Yeah.
Right?
I've always had a black cat.
Yeah. Right? Must be a past life thing.
Maybe,
we've got it together. Right? But yes, the familiar of, some witches also being black cats. So they got a bit of a bad rap. And I also feel the same about bats.
I love
And
bats
because
too.
I love bats. They're sweet. They really are.
Also
Those
known
are-
as sky puppies.
That's what I was going to say. Little sky puppies
Yeah.
with wings, those little
The little
faces.
face,
I love them.
yes.
Oh, like the flying fox, the bigger ones. They're
Yes.
so cute.
I know.
We have bat boxes because we do. They eat more bugs than any bird out there. I'll tell you. Like, I used to watch them coming around and skimming off the pool at night, and I'd be just like, work for your keep.
Yeah. We used to have one when we lived in New Brunswick, and my husband built a bat box, but no bats came around, even though there were bat boxes on the just on the edge of the town. And then my husband found out that it helps if you purchase bat guano, which is bat poop, to put in the house.
Pretty much.
We never did that, but yeah.
And I think it has to be done certain times of year. I think they recommend end of August, something along those lines. I think before they have babies or things like that. It's not like birds where you try to attract in the spring, but they're quite lovely to have around. And I've always sort of rescued them. I've never been wigged out.
Aww.
In the manor house that we lived in, which was haunted as heck.
Oh,
we had a bat came in through the tower at one point. We're like, how did you get in here? And this thing would just can't wig. They always go up, and it would go through the whole top floor, and it would just fly back. So I would just clap my hands, and it to send it back off. And eventually, just through clapping our hands, we were able to get it to go out through the front door on the next level.
Oh, wow.
I know. Well, because they're little radars, right? You create that vibration, and they would react and do this total. Because I'm thinking, okay, I could try to corner it with a blanket, but you don't want one in your hair, of course, because the little wings, and it just would be a bad thing for both of us. So
I have a little story about bats. Years ago, when I was living in New Brunswick, we were at a movie theater. I can't remember what the movie was called, but all of a sudden, people throughout the theater would be ducking and screaming. Just at the same time that there's
right.
a scene in the movie, they're in a bat cave and there's bats. Well, then all of a sudden the movie stops and they turn the lights on. There were two bats in the movie theater dive bombing people. It was so
Oh,
funny. Yeah, so
oh,
they had to give us free tickets so we could go watch the movie again because they had to stop it to try and get the bats out. And I'm like, you better not kill them. Like, try and humanely
yes.
capture them and release them outside. But yeah, that was
Yeah,
so
because
funny.
it gets funky with people yelling or clapping or, "Ah," because that
Yeah,
sound really messes them up. So you have to always be so careful and bear that in mind.
yeah.
Poor little dudes, like
We're
they
so
got it rough.
afraid. Yeah, they
They
do.
got it rough, and they get cold, because they're so little. At
Yeah,
least in our part of the world, you go down to Indonesia, and they're the size of a fox.
they're
Those
pretty
are
big.
cuddle puppies.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Cuddle puppies, I
Cuddle
love it.
sky puppies, I know. So it's not always creepy. I don't know. I think it's
No.
just this whole element, and that's the sort of the way it goes. But again, this is something that started in medieval times,
Mhm.
and they were described as being, again, a witch's familiar. So if a bat was seen flying around someone's house 3 times, it meant that someone within the house was going to die. If it
Mm.
flew into your house on Halloween, it was a sign that your house was haunted and ghosts had to let the bat in.
Well, we
So
know that your old manor was definitely haunted.
we do.
Your house was alive, like,
People
yeah.
would say that, we don't have it anymore.
Yeah, I
But we
know.
we were quite comfortable there, and people would see pictures of it, or they would visit, and they would be just like, this house, it just breathes, like it has its own like vibration. And it was strange because when you were inside of it, like being intuitive, I'd be buzzing all the time. But
Mhm.
it wasn't uncommon to, walk and see the front door, or even we had like a swing door, in the dining room, and right in the middle of the day, it would just go right open, you know. And
Mm.
I remember at one time I was coming in, and I opened the front door because we had to go through a vestibule door, and we had to go through the main door.
Mhm.
And for those for reference, it was a Second Empire Gothic revival, big offset tower, just beautiful
Beautiful.
house. And then there's this voice, and it's going, "Hello there." And I'm looking around going, "Hey."
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think I recognize your voice. We would get drive-bys because a thing, was like a freaking beacon. So I would get people message me all the time. They'd see pictures of the house and send me messages about it. And, "Do you know there's this or this?" I'm like, "And more."
Yeah.
So it's
Well, I
just,
remember the first time I saw a picture of the manor and I messaged you and I said, "Your house is alive, isn't it?" Like, you're like, "Yep." And I've never been there, but I described the inside of your house and you're like, "Yep, that's what it looks like." I'm like, "Yeah, it's very cool. I wish you could see it in person, but
yeah. Well,
yeah.
Linda and Katie, when we filmed Survivor,
Yep.
I think it was season 5 at the time, or maybe we did season 4 and 5, or part of 4 and 5. Anyways, when they came in, and I welcomed them in and gave them a tour before filming started, and they saw we had this grand staircase that had all these mirrors. They just looked at each other, went, "Ah, it's me." Strategically placed, no bouncing. you know so it was just like, oh my god. And they were hearing stuff all over the place.
Yeah.
They were very active. I mean,
Amazing.
we had people who wanted to come and film there just to film there.
Mm.
And it was sort of a comedic ghost hunting sort of show, and there was an edge of comedy to it. And when they were there, coins started dropping from the ceiling. I
What
mean,
kind of
they didn't
coins?
drop coins for us ever.
What kind of coins?
I think they were actually like nickels or something, or quarters. I can't even remember. They were
Yeah.
pretty modern day, like, because that was my thing. But anyway, I'm just like, what are they, really old? But they weren't. So we don't know where they came from, but they came from the second
Hmm.
floor down into the parlor. And they
Mhm.
were actually able to film one coming. just dropping
Oh,
down.
that's wild.
It was, because up above over the parlor was it would have been the original, like the house is built for the lady of the house at the time to entertain in. So it
Mhm.
had beautiful feminine features to it. Like the front columns weren't big and chunky. They were really beautiful,
Mhm.
fine architecture to it. That would have been her room. So she could look out to the
Oh.
front, and she would have looked over the river at the time.
Mhm.
And before they built some big crazy church there. Anyway, so coins would have been coming from upstairs. They would have been coming from her room. So, they
Interesting.
went out to eat, and we're hearing all this running around upstairs. And Wayne and I are looking at each other, the only two in the house going, somebody is excited to keep going.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's a great experience. It was really a great experience.
Hmm.
And ironically, it would get a lot of spiders, which is next on the list.
Oh, I don't like spiders.
No, I'm not a fan either. But like bats and black cats, folklore shows that spiders are being evil companions to witches during medieval times. One superstition states that if a spider fell into a candle lit lamp, it was consumed by the flame that witches were nearby. If you saw a spider on Halloween, then the spirit of a deceased loved one was nearby. It's weird how they would associate one from going from witches to a deceased loved one.
Yeah.
It's weird how everything keeps crossing. But these are all things that are very much a part of even modern day decor and stories,
Yep.
for Halloween. Witches. Today's image of a witch stems from the pagan goddess known as a crone, who
Mhm.
was honored during Samhain. The crone was also known as the Old One or the Earth Mother. The crone symbolized wisdom and change and the turning of seasons. But that's not how we look at them today,
No.
right? That's not at all how we look at them today. But do we, in a way, honor them by dressing like them? I don't know,
Hmm.
right? And same with cauldrons. The pagan Celts believed that after death, all souls went into the crone's cauldron, which symbolized the Earth Mother's womb. There, all the souls awaiting reincarnation as a goddess stirring would allow for new souls to enter the cauldron so the old souls could be reborn.
That I
See,
did not know.
it all seems to come back to
It's all
the
symbolism.
dying and the rebirth,
Yep.
or you know putting everything to bed for the fall,
Mhm.
preparing for the awakening and the rebirth into the spring. It's just very interesting how all of these pieces of folklore in one form or another is death and rebirth.
Yep.
So the broomstick. The
Mhm.
broomstick is a superstition rooted in medieval myths. Folklore says that the elderly introverted women who were accused of witchcraft were usually too poor to afford a horse. Therefore, they would navigate through the woods on foot with the help of a walking stick or a broom.
Mhm.
So, no, they didn't actually fly them. but
Nope.
but English folklore tells us that during the nighttime ceremonies, witches would rub a flying potion together, putting it on their bodies, close their eyes, and felt as though they were actually flying. So, probably mushrooms, like hallucinogenic mushrooms
Yep.
or ointments, would cause numbness, rapid heartbeat, and confusion, which basically gave them
Mm.
the illusion, perhaps, that they were flying. This is the logic people say, oh, this is definitely what it would have been, right?
Yep.
So, hence the myth of the flying witch on a broomstick.
I'd
So,
like to add to that too. They
okay.
used to also have back in the day, in order for they would do rituals to make sure that they would have good, healthy crops the next year. They
Mhm.
want to make sure that they grow up, so they would be on their broomsticks and they'd be jumping to symbolize the crops growing up, so the people would see that they're flying
Mhm.
on their
Right.
broomstick. Yeah.
See? I love that stuff. I love that
Yeah.
stuff. I just love how they put all of this stuff together. But I love how it's made its way thousands of years,
Mhm.
not just through medieval times, but I mean, a lot of these traditions stem back to the Celts and the Druids, which were like 2,000 years ago, who were
Mhm.
technically made their way to North America. Just saying, whole other show, but we know they were here. So
Mhm.
some of these traditions could very much have traveled not just, through that part of the world. They may have already been over here as well. So don't
Mhm.
shoot the messenger. I research, I find stuff. That's what I do.
You do
Hey,
find stuff.
I find great stuff. I love learning new things.
Yeah.
Trick or treat and costumes. So the pagan Celts believe that during Samhain, the veil between the worlds were at its, the
Thinnest.
thinnest,
Yep.
allowing for the ghosts of deceased to come and mingle with the living. They believe that these souls would disguise themselves in human form, such as figures that would knock at your door asking for food or money. If they were turned down, you risk receiving the wrath of the spirit by becoming cursed or haunted.
Mhm.
So another Celtic myth says that dressing up as a girl would fool evil spirits into thinking that you were one of them. I'm thinking a girl, a ghoul, maybe. I'm thinking ghoul. Anyway, so they would not take your soul, which
Mhm.
is strange. I mean, evil spirits. So what kind of, what we're talking, elemental spirits? Like they're not really specifying. I don't know that human spirits would have the ability to do that, but it is interesting because back then, I'm not sure how much they would have differentiated between that of the dead and those of otherworldly beings,
Yep. And when you
right?
look at the Halloween costumes from back then to now, they were creepy back then. They were terrifying to look
Uh,
at now.
those are really scary.
Yeah, the costumes are scarier than the myths,
It's
It's
true. It's true. They were just foul and angry looking.
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
they were. Oh my gosh. Um, Bobbing for apples, tradition that was introduced by the Irish. Other traditions such as roasting nuts and fortune telling,
Mhm.
once a part of the Halloween tradition, seems to have largely disappeared from modern day Halloween celebrations. So that's something that I guess, maybe if you are maybe at a private party or
Mm.
something, you're not going to see them too much. But fortune telling, roasting nuts seems to be, well, the roasting nuts seems to be more of a Christmas thing now, which,
Yeah.
by the way, a lot of ancient traditions said that it was the end of December where the veil between the two worlds was the thinnest,
Hmm.
not October. So, that's interesting as well because a lot of ancient traditions would show people preparing, for holidays
Mhm.
or, the winter solstice and bringing in their loved ones or setting spaces for them. Everything was geared again to the dead and getting so many different visits. So also very fascinating.
Do you think does it say anything about maybe Christianity is the one that changed all that? The thinning of the veil will be October instead of December?
Well, it could be because of their strong belief, of course, in the birth of Christ. I don't think that they would want to merge the two. However, I think it was a big spiritual major event. Then that of course,
Mhm.
it would make sense that during the time of the year where things were the thinnest, that it would be easier to navigate.
Mhm.
But that's a whole other show right there. So we'll just stick to this one. A thing called souling. And that's Souling, souling. In medieval Britain and Ireland, souling much resembles what we call modern day trick or treating. Souling, with the poor would knock on doors. Hallowmas is what it was called, asking
Yep.
for food in exchange for prayers for the dead. In the northern part of England, special cakes were made and left in church as church offerings for the dead. It was common tradition. See, you notice how we have the Christmas cake and stuff?
Mhm.
Anyway, it was common tradition in many parts of northern England where adults and later children would dress up, sing, and collect money or food. And you would do things with, this is where the church comes in, prayers, not pumpkin. A Catholic tradition offering prayers for the dead. It was done by ringing church bells, lighting candles and torches on November 1st. So we're getting into that All Souls Day again, right?
Mhm.
So so in medieval times, prayers were said for the souls trapped in purgatory. And this assisted and it would it would help them return to Earth and ask relatives for assistance in their journey. So you can see, like right now, Halloween itself technically wasn't introduced or celebrated, shall we say, in America until the Irish immigrants arrived in 1840 during Ireland's Great Potato Famine. And the
Mm.
current and customary trick or treating tradition began around the late 1950s. Some believe that it was in the World War era, World War II era. And of course, I think in the end of the day, we can thank the Irish for all of that.
Yep.
So fun, right? So the whole lot of stuff. There's so much stuff that you can go back in time, and there's still so much more.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
there's so much more. But I love the Victorians, how they love the macabre, and
Mm-hmm.
they made Halloween that much more fun. They always made everything that much more fun, even like the Christmas time, picnicking in cemeteries, seances, the whole.
Ghost stories
Oh my
at
gosh,
Christmas time. We need to
it
bring
was.
that back. Yeah.
Oh, I know, right? And they would give out, instead of gifts, they would give out, aside from the ghost stories, these crazy macabre type cards,
Mm-hmm.
and be just like, okay, like that the whole thing. The more obscure, the better. The more
Mm-hmm.
talked about more talking you could do about the said card, then it was a winner. So they would try to get very creative with the type of cards that they would give out. But Victorians loved picnicking in cemeteries. It's a really big thing. They loved seances at any given time. You go back to times, example, Lilydale with the Fox sisters. Harry Houdini tried to debunk them forever.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had President Abraham Lincoln and his wife, who were frequent flyers in Lilydale. It's the largest spiritual community in North America. I used to go there just for downtime. I know wonderful people there who live there all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just filled with history. And they still have nights where you can go in the summer and have a full Victorian seance.
Oh, that
And
would
they
be
dress up in
amazing.
Victorian garb,
Oh,
and they do
beautiful.
table tipping, and
Yep.
they do all kinds of crazy things. They'll do lantern ghost walks through the woods, and they create houses in the woods for the fairies. So they follow a lot of these ancient traditions, but they do it year round.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say it'd be nice to bring that back, there are some places where they actually do. They still continue to do
That's
that.
nice. It always makes me wonder too, like back in the day when a lot of houses, especially churches and cemeteries, they would have iron fences to keep out or keep in.
Mhm.
And it's just a lot of those traditions we don't have this day and age. So I'm just wondering if that's why there's a lot. It almost seems like there's a lot more paranormal activity now, or
Mhm.
I don't know if that's the reason or if it's just people are talking about it more. But back then when there was iron everywhere, so it just makes me wonder.
I think when you go back into, first off, belief systems,
Mhm.
you had a lot of that in the old world for alleged vampires and
Yep.
such. And as people immigrated here, those belief systems still would have come with them.
Yep.
But in Victorian times, I think so much of it got to be, I think there was such an interest in it. And I'll give you
Mhm.
2 reasons to your question. I'll give you
Mhm.
2 answers. But if we're sticking with the Victorians, you have things such as, for example, terms such as awake, where, back in the day, the big square grand pianos were
Mhm.
coffin size. I have a square grand piano, and I have a
Oh.
Victorian coffin. And yeah, from the 1800s.
Mhm.
It's not in the house right now. It's in storage,
Mhm.
but at one time at the manor house, it's this bigger house. But it was called awake because they would be in a coffin, and they were hoping that all the dancing and singing music and smelling good food and the vibration from the piano would wake them up.
That I didn't know.
Yes.
Hmm.
And if that failed and they went into the ground, then
Mhm.
they would have the term saved by the bell.
Yep.
So where did the term come from? Why did they need it? We can thank grave robbers,
Yep.
because grave robbers would get into the coffins or the boxes, and they would find scratches on the inside. So they knew how functional you're going to be after that. Seeing something like that was my thought,
Yeah.
you know. So they knew that person came to life, or came to, they were never dead, but the heartbeat was so low they just couldn't
They
pick it
couldn't
up. They just
detect it.
didn't
Yeah.
have the technology, right?
Mhm.
So hence people going into the ground would tie something around the finger, a string around the finger, and they would bring
Mhm.
it up to this bell. But you needed somebody to hear the bell,
Mhm.
hence the graveyard shift.
Yeah.
People had to stay and listen for the bell.
Mhm.
And it has happened. There are places. I think Wayne was saying he was on a tour out east at one time, and when they showed them the ledger, there was a person in that town says saved by the bell this year, went back into the ground 3 years later. Again,
Wow.
how functional of a human being are you going to be after going in the hole and coming back out? It's got to be terrifying. But it was, they heard the bell, they went, they dug them up, and that's what got them out. So you had to be really quick.
Mhm.
Right. So there's a lot of these terms that seem pretty macabre, but they came from, it's like we were talking about at the beginning of the show. In order for a situation to happen, well, this worked, put our coat on backwards and say these
Mhm.
words. Something had to have happened. And I think this whole prequel to this whole funeral thing came from this happening to multiple people. Right.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it had to happen often enough that they're like, "Well, maybe we should rethink these things."
right. But can you imagine had they put these big cages over them? Like you'd never get in there.
Yep.
There was a guy, I'm not sure where he was from because it eludes me at the moment, but he was so terrified of being buried alive that they put a shaft with a window that came in right over his head. And so he could see out.
Mhm.
And again, with the bell thing, so people could come and check on him every day. And Wayne actually told me a story because he used to work for the telephone company. And
Mhm.
he said when a man passed away at one point, it was left in his will that he wanted a telephone to go all the way down into,
No
he
way.
took it with him. They were provisions in his will for 25 years. I think if you don't get it in the first few hours, but
Yeah.
I'm sure he said it was 25 years prepaid. And this thing always went, and for years you
Hmm.
could call it, nobody would ever pick up. And then when the contract ended, that was it.
Wow. That's
So
crazy.
there's that fear, of not knowing. So it's just, but I mean, I could see where, a lot of these hauntings would come into place.
Mhm.
And with things like that, if you have the fear of God into you, when we say, well, let me get back first before we come to that about another reason why we think it's so haunted. Have we ever considered maybe the tulpa theory? Creating, like, have we manifested so much through all of this media,
Mhm.
all of this belief system of, ghosts and goblins and everything else? It's like Slender Man. That was created in a game room, and it was
Yep.
manifested with certain creations, and they would give this guy so many characteristics that he started being seen around the world. And there's a lot of different beings that are created this way that maybe have never existed before, that are brought
Mhm.
into being. But with that being said, God-fearing people back in the day, especially,
Mhm.
were God-fearing people, in ancient, medieval times, not, I'm sure to a degree, but not so much until this side of the world, more so for the Puritans and the really hardcore religious. And many people came as immigrants with that belief system.
Mhm.
And you're going to break a commandment. You're probably thinking, I think I'll just take my chances and stay right here.
Yeah.
I'm good, thanks.
Yeah.
Right? So thanks, but no. But they forget the part where your God is all loving and forgiving, and it's just you broke the commandment. And I think it's the institution
Yep.
of that belief system that says you can't do this or you won't do that, and you're going to hell. And no, I'm not. I'm gonna stay right here. right?
Yep.
My thoughts, anyway. So,
Sorry, I had a tickle in my throat. Yeah, and it just goes to show how strong thoughts and words can actually be. Like when you mentioned about Slenderman,
oh,
it's
it's
powerful.
crazy. But
Yeah.
that goes back to, help us go back to, or for golems. Let's
Yeah.
say golems type of tulpa, going back into Jewish traditions and
Yep.
such, Hebrew tradition of creating these golems that were created to protect the individual who created them
Mm-hmm.
out of clay and manifested into a being. So, I mean, this has been something that has gone on for a long time, and these golems would be left and passed down
Yep.
through families upon
Yep.
death. You get somebody's thinking aggressive things too. So, it's like, no, I'm good. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know. Again, you're just getting into a lot of this really ancient stuff.
I can't remember if it was from Supernatural, the TV show, or if it was a movie or what it was that I was watching on. And I just remember bits and pieces, but there was this somebody going to university in the States, and he was passed down. I think it was an uncle or something. Like he was
I
of a
think I've
Jewish
seen
faith.
that. Yeah,
Yeah, and he had
grandfather. I think that was Supernatural.
yeah, and then he
Yeah.
got this thing passed down to him, and he's like, I don't know anything about this. I don't know how to control it. It wasn't
Younger
taught to me.
generation. I know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like they don't have the same mindset,
yeah.
I think, as some of the older generations with respects to that.
I think it was Supernatural. Now that I think of it,
Yeah.
they really did their research for that TV show,
Mm-hmm.
and they brought forth so many interesting things. It's just I just used to
It was
love that
well
show.
done. It was well
Yes,
done.
it was. Yeah.
Yes. So
Wow.
that's been
Any
fun. I'm glad. I'm glad that we got to cover so much of
Me
this. It was
too. You covered a
outstanding.
lot. Yeah, you did a lot of research.
I just kept it there. Just keep it going. It keeps the
Yeah.
info. My head goes, so it's in front
Yeah.
of me. It's a little easier. So
So are there any Halloween traditions that you follow?
Halloween traditions for myself. I've you know what? I've always loved Halloween. It's been more of a
Me too.
lifestyle for me.
Mhm.
Um, growing up, had to do it, love dressing up, more than anything else. But I grew up with spirits around me or
Mhm.
activity around me, and that was just sort of a generation thing. It wasn't uncommon to go to my grandparents' house and see past family members. And I didn't have
Oh,
a fear
wow.
of it because the fear of human spirits were never instilled to me. So Halloween to me, it was just another, another day sort of thing with respects to the activity side of things. But I loved everything about it. I
Mhm.
still do. Right. I mean, at one time, like I had an entire funeral collection, antique funeral collection.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's interesting.
Antique church collection had all kinds of that. I still
Wow.
have like skulls and all kinds of things, real ones.
Yeah.
My oldest one is a medieval one from
Really?
1465, from the
Holy
St.
cow.
Elizabeth's blood of 1465. It came out of a collection of a little old lady in England who
Mhm.
died. She had over 200 of them.
Wow. Why
I
would she
know.
collect 200 of, like
I don't know. Maybe she lived near a graveyard. I don't know.
wow.
But it's well documented. And after her passing, the collection got parted out. And a friend of mine out west who deals in these sort of antiquities messaged and he said, I don't know why this one has your name on, because it's not like I didn't have others. So many have come across my computer. Would you be interested in this? Would you be interested in this? And out of them, I think 5 ended up with me, and one I just parted with a couple of years ago. It's like
Hmm.
they've either had to speak to me. You have to make the decision to become that caretaker for a little while,
Mhm.
and realize that you don't get to keep it forever. Eventually, it has to go to somebody.
Mhm.
So you better have offspring or family that's like, yeah, I'm about it, because otherwise, it's a weird thing to leave behind,
It is.
right?
It really
Yes,
is.
it
When
is.
we
It is.
when we lived in Alberta a few years ago, there was it was in Wainwright, Alberta, and every year there was this Wainwright haunted house.
Right.
And the guy that used to organize it was the best haunted house I'd ever seen, and I was so so honored to be able to be a part of it when we were living there. My daughter and I, and even my son and husband, helped build the haunted house. So the first couple of years, it was in the old Wainwright hotel. It was
Mhm.
built in the early 1900s, I think it was.
Mhm.
Long story short, it's gutted now. There's nothing in there.
Oh,
So they just have it's 3 stories high.
right.
And one of the props that Mike had, who was the organizer of the haunted house, it was a skull in a plexiglass box. And that
Mhm.
was one of the props. And I always had a weird feeling from it. Not bad. It was just like, okay. So I asked him one day, I said, Mike, is that real? He goes, yeah, it is. It was given to me. It was used as a prop on a movie, apparently, but apparently it was a real skull. And I'm like, yeah, I can tell you that it's authentic. It's a real skull. I don't know who it was. It didn't
Mhm.
really speak to me that much, but I could definitely tell it was real. But it was a really cool piece that he had for the haunted house.
I think it's great from the historical aspect of everything. Like mine all come, they're all Germanic for the
Mm-hmm.
most part. One my first one came to me as a haunted object.
Oh.
And he's called was called a phantom skull. So he's probably about 120 years old, and he
Mhm.
came from an old university in Germany. And they're encased in like glass as a specimen, but they're all encased. So he's perfect. I've seen some pretty harsh looking ones all done in this way because they're used for education.
Mhm.
And this guy weighs a ton. He's heavy. And I never had problems with him. The homeowners are just like, things are always carrying on. And like, oh, he got a big helmet on his head. I don't know. Maybe he's just annoyed because the guy had a really big military collection. And he'd throw his big helmet on him. So he sat on my desk forever with it was just like a Rush cap or a Lord of the Rings cap. And I named him Jeffy. I'm like, oh yeah, Jeffy, we're gonna get some work done. I never had issues with him ever. And I always had showcases for them. And I always like there's just something that you're a caretaker. And a lot of things come to me that way. And having traveled around the world and spending a lot of time in cathedrals and castles and things like that,
I'd
I've
love to see
acquired
that.
this taste for old world stuff, as you can see. This is
Yep.
this is my office.
Yeah,
The whole
that's
house is
so
like,
amazing.
you know, but I mean, back then, especially in Victorian times and going back to old castles and medieval times, you had the
Mhm,
games room with taxidermy. I've got incredible pieces of taxidermy that are very, very old.
mhm,
And one of our oldest pieces comes from the old Niagara Falls Museum of Oddities. Like I knew the guy who bought it.
hmm.
I filmed a segment with him, and
There's
I
an
was
oddities museum in Niagara Falls?
used to be from the
Oh, used to be.
1800s. This
Oh,
is where
wow.
the mummy of King Ramses came from. There were 8 mummies
Oh,
in
wow.
there, and when
Yeah.
Billy Jameson bought it, and, he passed away sadly, quite young, but I had the pleasure of filming with him and conversing with him quite a bit, and, when he passed, everything got divided up. So, this is a peacock, a huge peacock from, like, late 1800s. And the partners were just stuff was just getting sold off. So
Mhm,
I'm like, yeah, I want this thing for sure. It's a piece of history. But there were 8 mummies in there. And when I was at Billy's, I saw that he had a couple of them. He goes, oh, the other 6 were sold to the museum in Atlanta. One of them ended up being a royal mummy of King Ramses I. And how can you tell you have a royal mummy is they have the arms crossed.
mhm,
And this went in there, and he had the same features as the Ramsian family,
mhm.
right? And the museum contacted Dr. Zai Hawass, and it was the first
I
mummy
met
ever.
him.
I just love him.
Me
I
too.
love him. But they issued him a passport, and he flew to Egypt. And in return and gratitude, the Atlanta Museum gets first dibs on any of the things that go on tour from Egypt, and they get it for as long as they want it,
Hmm.
and in gratitude for returning their king. Because so many in Victorian times, talking about weird ass stuff again,
Mhm.
so many artifacts and mummies were taken out
Yep.
of Egypt
So
and
sad.
stolen, right?
Mhm.
Stolen and ended up in museums all over the world. He's been trying to get so many of them back. But then you had some of the cultures that used to grind up mummies for medicinal
Yes.
purposes. So A lot of them are just gone. We have royal mummies as well that are just gone. They've never been found.
Yep.
Nefertiti, they speculate. Queen Nefertari, the principal wife of Ramses II, has never been found except for her knees.
Oh, wow.
I know. And how does Egypt's, one of Egypt's most beloved queen,
Yep.
just go completely MIA? Well, some of them were removed for safekeeping, but never found. It's either a good hiding spot, or she's in a private collection, or she got ground up. One of the two. It's very sad any way you look at it. But right.
Yeah, I had the honor of meeting Dr. Hawass when King Tut came to Ontario,
Very
and
nice.
the kids were like 3 and 5 at the time. And I just had, because I've always been fascinated with ancient Egypt, so we went to see the exhibit, and then afterwards, Dr. Hawass was giving a lecture at the university there, so I bought tickets,
Nice.
and so I met him, got some autograph. I got a hat like he wears that's autographed, and he was just signing. He was a machine. Like, he didn't have time to talk to people. People would stand next to him. They'd put the books down or whatever. He'd sign it next. So I had the honor of being able to stand behind him while the person next to me took my camera and took a picture. So,
that's nice.
Oh man, I just love that guy. He's so interesting to hear. Like, he's so passionate about Egyptology. Yeah.
I think he gave up his position, pretty high
so.
position on the board, to stay in archaeology.
Yep.
And, I was thrilled to be able to see the Tutankhamun exhibit when it was at home, when I was in Cairo. And it's
Nice.
just, it was just something, I never went to see it when it came back this side of the world, because for me, it was just like, it's there, it's home. It was just a bit of a kinship, but there's so much that surrounds all of that as well. The whole Akhenaten family, and the whole line of them had the elongated skulls, and of course his daughter Scotia, who ended up leaving when everything went down with King Akhenaten, ended up fleeing with other Celts who were part of King Akhenaten's guard. Yes, you heard right. The Celts were in Egypt. She went to settled in Ireland, and eventually she is a creator of Scotland. She is the founder of Scotland, Queen Scotia.
Oh, I did not know that. Wow,
yes.
That's amazing.
Ta-da.
You have so much. I just want to tap into your brain and get all that information.
I know we'd be here for another hour.
At least.
I know.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left, Michelle. I have to say this was an amazing episode. Thank you. It's always so nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing me on to the UPRN family. Again, a huge thank you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
If you could tell, although the listeners probably know, but if you could tell the listeners and viewers where they can find you.
MichelleDesrochers.com is probably the easiest place to find me. I'm not on social media a lot. I do tend to get way too many messages,
I can imagine.
Combined, one person can't do it all. But, you can email me through the website, and that's probably the best way, or MichelleDesrochersContact@gmail.com. Nice and easy. I often get asked about film. Nope. Retired from film. Retired. Yeah. So, so I've done a couple documentaries since that, and that is it. So if you want to see me, it's every Wednesday and Thursday night, 9 to 11 p.m. Eastern, on the Outer Realm Radio with myself and my bubbly little compadre, Amelia Pisano. And, we have guests, all different genres: ancient, out of place history, paranormal, cryptid, you name it, it's there. There is a mix of everything. UFOlogy.
It's an amazing show. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, we're going into our episode 482, I believe.
Holy wow.
So
that's amazing.
A while.
Yeah. Whenever I'm not working, I try to tune in, but a lot of times I'm working during your live one, so
it's a tough one. I know.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. But we love seeing you there. So
thank you. I appreciate that.
Tapping in.
So thank you so very much. And you take care. Much love to you and Wayne, and take care.
Thank you. Happy hauntings, everyone.
Happy hauntings.
Good night.